Hi everyone, good evening. Welcome to the technical session over dinner titled Resilient Communities. For our speakers today, we have Ms. Linda Etta, who's the Senior Blue Economy Advisor for the African Union Commission, Malshini Senaratne, Assistant Head of Department at the University of Seychelles, Senthilkumaran Krishnan, who's the Head of Platforms and Information Systems at Reliance Foundation, Simone Smith-Godfrey, who's the founder of Blue Heritage Chamber of Commerce in South Africa, Weliswa, Matekenya, who's a senior lecturer at the Nelson Mandela University in South Africa, and our moderator for tonight, Julie Lusinger, who's the founding partner and co-founder of Ghost Partnerships in New Zealand. I would like to hand it over to you, Julie.
Great, thank you, Tanya. Tēnā koutou katoa. I'll just give a little bit of session context for this before we get into the questions for the panel. So this session will explore how grassroots action across the global south and beyond is working to increase the resilience of coastal and island communities in the wake of the climate crisis and public health emergencies. We will share examples of new forms of leadership, especially by women, and identify measures that link these communities to the broader global conversation on ocean governance. We'll go through a series of questions, and then after the questions, where each panel member will get an opportunity to respond, we will then go into a Q&A. And when we do the Q&A, if everyone, if we can keep away from just making statements, but ask questions, and that means that all the panel gets to engage with your questions. I like your hair as well. It's great hair. We'll kick off with the first question. What pressures have been put on coastal areas and ocean-dependent communities in this era of pandemics, austerity and climate change? Who would like to answer that one, kick that one off? What about Senthil? I thought I'd see if you're listening.
Thank you. In Indian perspective is about that we have more than 7,500 kilometer coastal length. It covers about that both mainland and island, as well as about that it's covering about that 9 states and 4 union territory. Important thing is about that around 250 million, that means approximately 17% of that Indian population are living about 50 kilometer radius of that this coastal. So in this background is the main the challenges is about that one for the sea level rise is about that coastal erosion, as well as about that another is about oil spill, and another is about that we are in the name of that tourism or maybe modernization or maybe industrialization, where also is about that degrading or maybe destroying about that wetlands, as well as about the mangroves, because that also is about that we are facing about a lot of biodiversity issues, as well as about that livelihood issues. Another is about that in the name of the conservation is always the conservation policies about that affected only for the small fisher folk, not on the bigger people. Another is about that women and as well as about the vulnerable people is not in the decision making. So that also is about another challenge. And apart from this, about that untreated water, as well as about the garbage, this also is about that another big challenges in that coastal areas. The last one is about that overfishing, as well as about that ocean, increasing the ocean, what we call that temperature. We also about that facing about severe issues about the coral reefs, as well as about the food security, particularly about that various fishes. Fish species is liked by the coastal communities. Now it's degrading in a big way.
Cool, great, thank you. What about Marshi?
Yeah, thank you for pulling me into that conversation.
In the context, Seychelles is, I think, made up of 115 islands, is that
Correct.
right? And three main inhabited islands?
Correct,
Yeah.
yes, well done. So I just wanted to showcase the difference between the sizes, right? So we have India, 7,500 kilometers of coastline. Seychelles is 115 low-lying islands. India has about 14 ports, I'm guessing. And shipping is your major transportation route, right? Seychelles has one. So it's a critical node when it comes to our country. We also have only one airport and one runway. So from a small island developing state perspective, we are extremely vulnerable to climate change, possibly a lot more than what India is facing now, because we are attacked by all borders, right? So we've got ocean acidification, we've got rising sea levels, we've got sea temperature rise, we've got extreme weather changes as well. So against that backdrop, I also wanted to share with you a bit of the socio-economic conditions that my country is facing. And I think perhaps you will be able to relate to this. So when I look at the recent studies, 58% of women experience GBV, which is gender-based violence, at least once in their lifetime in the Seychelles. 43% of men as well. 10% of the workforce in Seychelles was found to be addicted to heroin or to have some form of substance abuse to heroin. Now, when you think of these figures, possibly you're not very shocked, but when I tell you the population of Seychelles is 104,000 people only, then you might start to rethink those figures and find it a little bit shocking, right? So I'll just end on the fact that with COVID, we have extreme poverty and social inequality as well in the country, and this was largely exacerbated as a result of the pandemic. So I'll stop it here because my colleague has touched on quite a few points. Perhaps someone wants to add.
How about Tanya?
Linda.
Linda, sorry.
It's okay.
Just given from an African Union perspective, given you've cover a much broader, larger area.
Okay, thank you. Maybe just a bit of context. Africa as a continent has 30,000 kilometers of ocean space. And at the African Union, like my colleague in Seychelles said, what you may not know also is that Seychelles is the champion of blue economy on the continent, and they've done remarkable good job that other African countries need to emulate from. We've had a study carried out in most of the countries, and what we see is a decline of tourism for countries like Seychelles and Mauritius that are heavily dependent on the coastlines or the oceans as a source of tourism. And we've also had the economic vulnerabilities. We came from an era of COVID-19. We've had pandemic issues, and this is showing remarkably across the continent that it's had, especially from COVID, we had a lot of economic restraint on most African countries, particularly those in the small island developing states, Mauritius, Seychelles, Comoros, and Madagascar as well. And also, there's also the issue of austerity measures, reduced investments, opportunities. Most partnerships are not built, collaborations are not built because of the pressure of coastal communities. And as he also said, the issue of women, vulnerable communities, there's a lot of pressure to that community as well. And at the African Union, we recognize this, and we try to come up with programs that carry everyone along. There's inclusivity. We have the Women in Blue Economy program on the continent that makes sure that nobody's left behind, and it addresses issues like this. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Simone, what about from us, I guess South African, I know we're still within the African Union, but South African perspective.
Why don't I give it to you from the perspective of a child of the oceans? I come from a nautical family, and my first memory of the oceans is being a little girl grabbing my dad's pinky, boarding a boat. So what you have in Africa especially, and I believe that it's the same in the developing countries, is the oceans are seen as a career of necessity. It's not seen as a career of choice. I'm an example of somebody who made it my career of choice. And it's only because of my background in it. What you have in Africa predominantly is you have acute socio-economic circumstances that surrounds people who make their living from the oceans. And we have a dying out breed, the old fisherman, who sits with critical indigenous knowledge that could fuel decades of research projects. I'll give you a simple example. Did you know that where there's diamonds present in the oceans, that's where the crayfish will spawn? So if you follow the crayfish spawning patterns, you might strike it lucky. And that is the kinds of knowledge that is embedded in the hands of the old seafaring folk, the old oceans folk, that is not being capitalized from. We have good marine research and science and technology that's coming to the front, but we're lacking on the maritime side of it. We're lacking the man-made component, the component where we take what is out there and we translate it into tools that humans can use who are in those communities. Now, when you review the quality of life and the particular legacy that political regimes left behind in these coastal communities, you will also find that in Africa it's very difficult to do coastal and marine tourism. There is a reason for that. Previous regimes have been assigned exclusive villages all along our coast, which we can't access. On 99-year lease, UNCLOS says that a state is only the custodian of coastal land. The citizens are the owners. And in my country specifically, in the late 1980s, when it was clear that we're going to experience a regime change, all those 99-year lease contracts was renewed. Now, the implications of that for coastal community members is that you don't have access. You can't. You can have all the grants available, all the opportunities available, but if you don't have the land, you've got nothing. Even if it's just to lease the land, then. Also, when you look at the deployment of technology in Africa, we are doing brilliant where it comes to the enhancement and the development at a very, very rapid speed of technology. But in Africa, the danger is that that would cause a greater divide because the access to that technology costs money. And the application of that technology is another area that requires some review, because it has been clear that certain technologies that has been deported and exported to South Africa is operational technologies. So we are excluded from strategic technologies. So what is the point then? And those are the kinds of issues that comes up very strong in research when you review it. But when it comes to implementation, we have great policies, but implementation measures of success. When you look at the impact that COVID had on many countries, there is 35,500 fish species available in the world. We only exploit 633. So whose fault is it that our people are hungry? What happened to genetic material research and analysis to determine what we can do with the rest of that 35,000 species that are unexplored? And then I'm not even referring to sea plant species at this point.
Yeah, good provocation. Yeah. Weliswa, I know we were talking about your research earlier. Do you have a little final comment, or you're all good? Do you want to go on to the next one? You want to do the next one, don't you?
No.
Yeah, you good? Okay.
All right, I just want to agree with my fellow panelist next to me. But for me, I want to come on the perspective of the community. In South Africa, we've got initiatives that were implemented, that they worked, but they were not sustainable. The first one was Wild Coast mangrove restoration and the Kiona rehabilitation that were community-led, and those government, they come at that particular time, and unfortunately it was a very short period. Yes, they did create employment, but for a short period. These coastal communities are very vulnerable, and the coastal erosion, it does damage the infrastructure. The problem is the sustainability. Yes, we can have great initiative, but if they are not sustainable, these coastal communities are not being helped. Then with the blue ocean economy, what is it that we are bringing that will be sustainable? So my sort of comment today is, what about we create a twinning partnership? It could be between regions, between communities, and also even our international counterparts. So this initiative needs to be going continuously. We're learning from each other. We empower the community. We impact the skills. It doesn't matter. It could be the youth, our old forefathers and grandmothers, to transfer that indigenous knowledge. But it doesn't have to die out. It needs to be continuous and sustainable. So those vulnerable groups, who are saying we are trying to help them. They feel help. They are not excluded. Also in the policy perspective, their voices, if they are partaking in this initiative, their voices are being heard. So whatever they feel, now they feel excluded, that government is trying to run with this ball they don't know about. They just come, hey, we want you to do this A and B, and they are done after that, and they left them in the very situation they were before. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm still thinking about spawning crayfish and where I might find them. So we'll go on to the next question. So what mechanisms for support to these vulnerable groups have evolved and worked across the world, especially when it comes to climate adaptation? Maybe Marshi, I know in Seychelles we were just talking briefly before about, the recent, the climate shocks over the past few years, and everyone will remember the flooding and I guess the in light of rising sea levels.
Yes, Simone has also given me a lot to think about there with her intervention, and I want to find a few points to add to that, because I found it really interesting what you said about the indigenous side of things. So let me first talk about the Seychelles Blue Economy model. Yes, we are known in Africa and around the world as being the champions of the Blue Economy model. So for us, we've defined it as a model that predominantly looks at focusing on the balance between development of the oceans, yes, getting resources from that, because we have 1.3 square million kilometers of water to our name, but we only have 455 square kilometers of land. So for us, terming ourselves as a large ocean economy makes more sense than looking at our land capability. Pairing that development with conservation as well as equity for the country, right? So through the blue economy, one of the things that we did that made us really known to be pioneers in this space is that we launched the world's first blue bond, and it was valued at $15 million. It was brought together through public-private partnerships. We had the World Bank that was involved as well, and essentially it was so successful that 6 other countries also took up this blue bond format, and 6 other bonds were launched from 2015. We also closed a debt for nature swap in the Seychelles, so that's where we restructured some of our debt. And the proceeds from this restructure actually goes back to the country in the form of marine conservation projects. This was a way to kind of help communities in the Seychelles by giving them access to funding that they might not otherwise have had. So the money comes through a trust known as SECAT, and it gives you grant funding. And if your project proves to be very viable and perhaps commercial, you can then get a loan from a development bank of Seychelles, which also comes from the proceeds of these bonds. Now, why it's interesting is even I was lucky enough to get grant funding to do research in the Seychelles with respect to marine conservation. So it did not discriminate. Women, men, everyone could apply, but you had to be a Seychelles citizen. And you could partner with companies, universities, corporations around the world in order to get some grant funding. Why I think our experience from South Africa might differ slightly, Simone, is that we don't have tribal leaders. Our access and tenure to land and water might be a little bit more open than yours, which is where probably we've been a little bit luckier. And I only understood this now. We've been a little bit luckier in how we've been able to get these mechanisms down to grassroots community, and how we've been able to perhaps get access to funding that perhaps might not have been so open to us. And I do feel for your situation there, because indigenous knowledge is dying out. So we recently learned that some of our fishermen know about a particular kind of fish species that you can eat at a particular point in its life cycle. You can only eat it at that particular point. Any other point, it's apparently dangerous and poisonous to you. But it's not well known in science. It's known to some to some local fishermen, and now it's slowly starting to enter into the research space. It was those kinds of things that just made me think about how important it is to keep that knowledge around. But then you also have a sector with the fishermen where they're aging out. And the youth in Seychelles don't particularly want to go fishing anymore, guys. It's tiresome, it's labor intensive, and they'd rather do other jobs. So it's a sector that's worth paying attention to. And with respect to the blue economy, what it's done is it's allowed for grassroots communities, NGOs, to take up space, a little bit more space than they normally would, and to have their voices heard. So in Seychelles, when you think about our size, we've got 9 really large environmental NGOs, and they manage our UNESCO heritage sites, they manage a lot of our environmental sites, but we also have over 30 smaller entities of NGOs in this space. So the environmental space, conservation space in Seychelles is really quite large. And I'll just end with one thing as well for the Seychelles. We declared 30% of our exclusive economic zone a marine protected area, an MPA. And we declared that in 2020 in the height of COVID. But that also meant that we met that SDG 10 years ahead of target. And now it's about understanding exactly how to manage that MPA. So that's what's going on right now in the country.
Cool. Thank you. These guys are clearly more onto it than me, because I actually repeated the second question. I'm operating on 2 hours of sleep after a 27-hour flight. So the question actually was, which you answered correctly, was, can we identify a model of the blue economy that centres the experience and aspiration of coastal communities? And how can their concerns be raised at the global level? So, Simone, I think you want to answer that one.
I'm a very simple person. I like 1 + 1 to make 2, not 11. So when it comes to sustainability, I've embarked on a program that I call mathematical sustainability. Because in my country, I don't believe in an essay of emotions regarding my coastal communities. What you have is ownership of temporary ownership via quota system that is centered in certain hands who've built legacies and generational wealth out of it. And because we only exploit a very small percentage of our fish stocks, it's very difficult for other fishermen to come into that place. And also very difficult for other fishermen to become sea plant farmers out of it, because that structure is not there inherently. But when you apply the principles of sustainability, which is the three pillars of it, and you expand it into indicators that can mathematically be measurable, you can find the balance between community, the environment, and the operations. Because, and this is where the concept of value systems comes in. The value system has been profit maximization at the cost of everybody. I published in 2016 a definition of the blue economy as the sustainable industrialization of the oceans to the benefit of all. That includes human, the water, the plants, the animals, everything. And it's measurable. And that is the kinds of models that this industry demands. It's time that there is a deliberate attempt to walk away from the abstract and to walk into what can be quantified. How do we quantify it? Yes, perhaps one model is not exactly the right one, but it puts a framework there in the place for it. And when you look at the exchange between communities, environments, and operations that takes place in that blue economy environment, you'll find that the interactions between those pillars comes from income distribution, comes from knowledge and skills transfer, it comes from sector integration, measurable quantifiables that can be put into place. So, in a nutshell, the industry of this specific marine resources is ready for mathematics, but we seem to be lacking in terms of implementing the mathematics for it. So it is a very exciting area, and it is an area that I do look forward to engage with a number of people on it, and to see how one takes this further.
Cool, thank you. And I like the idea of keeping it simple as well. Senthil, what about from a, Indian, is there an Indian perspective on this?
Anything related to blue economy, or maybe about addressing the challenges, or maybe about the climate resilience. First is about to address the information gap or information asymmetry at that local level, because they are also looking about the dynamic real-time wind speed, wind direction, and availability of fish shoal, or maybe how they can use about the modern equipments, about the GPS and many things. And also they are not much aware, even though they are living near that mangroves, they are not unable to maybe impact or maybe importance of the mangroves or maybe wetland conservation. You know about that mangroves also acted as a bioshield, as well as about that they are also having a livelihood for that fish women, particularly about crab and shrimp. And also wetland is about that improving that water quality, as well as about that storm water management. So the thing is about that there is a need for that 4 linkages. One is about the lab to land, because about that many research institution or government department, they are working in the different aspects. For example, one day if that fisherman would like to go in Indian context within the 4 hours, 5 hours of fishing, morning he need about that, can I go fishing or not, venturing on the sea or not, based on that wave height, wind direction. And also it's about, they are looking about that if you want to go that where I can get that fish catch in a particular location, fish aggregation, they need about that what is the longitude, latitude. For that longitude, latitude is not understandable by the local community. You can convert that as a local language we called as a bogam. So similarly about that, they also need about that how to use the GPS. For the GPS, if you want by the, the government subsidies, how to handle the GPS, and after the catch, how to bring the hygienic quality of it to that fish in the shore. So in this background, there is a need for that NGOs or government department, as well as about academic, and as well as about research. This about that there is need of the multi-stakeholder partnership, and also use about that multiple communication tools. We should not look about only app or something. People are now extensively using about that WhatsApp or maybe local cable TV, FM radios. The idea is about how to reach the information, because even if you talk about the blue economy, there is a bottom line is about how to use that ocean resources in a sustainable way. It's not like exploiting way. It's maybe the people know about fisheries or maybe tourism or thing. The blue economy comes under that marine biotechnology for the medicines, or maybe about that seabed mining, or maybe blue energy kind of. These are the need about that lot of capacity building, and also build that information to that local community to improve the further. So the thing is about that their need for this kind of multi-stakeholder partnership, and also basically is about the ocean literacy should be taught, because Samir is here. Morning he talked about that inauguration. He talked about that how they bring that students for here and to understand future of that one. Like that, this kind of the ocean literacy needed at the local level to improve their capacity, as well as about that to address various information gaps, to improve that anything about the blue economy, or maybe any conservation, or maybe any resilience.
Great, thank you. I'd love to hear from Linda. You are a senior blue economy advisor. For your role, so.
So I was just going to say, is either he borrowed my notes or we shared notes before now. Okay, so I'll try to summarize it from the African perspective, which is quite broad. First of all, is the issue of dealing with it on engagement, which he highly captured very well. But at the African Union, we've realized that engagement is not just about partnerships or multilateral partnerships. We also have to reference, like she mentioned, indigenous partnerships. We realize that it's gradually fading away. Some countries don't even believe that they can benefit indigenously from their, like there could be that knowledge sharing. So what we're trying to do is to reintroduce it through the curriculums. We're reintroducing it through the ministries of educations, ensuring that from birth, from a very young age, kids, children are learned, are taught about what is going on in their oceans, what happens, not just about fishing. Because when you talk to an average African, what they understand about the ocean or blue economy is about the traditional fishing. But there's more to it. There's the energy generation, there's the tourism, there's different things, biotechnology as well, bioprospecting. So that institution of engaging indigenous knowledge should also be reintroduced through capacity building. We have centers of excellencies on fisheries and aquaculture in the continents. It's another way to promote that knowledge, making sure that Africans' knowledge on blue economy stays within Africa and is taught by Africans. We think African solutions to African problems. And there's also the thing of partnerships, like what we are doing now. We could learn from each other. There's knowledge sharing. I'm hearing very interesting things about the fish in Seychelles, when to eat and when not to eat. Panels like this, discussions like this, and sharing of information could also be very useful. There's also the need to engage with vulnerable communities. We call them the women and youth group. Some places say women are not vulnerable, but I believe they are. Because when you empower a woman, you empower a generation. So there's need for that as well. And then lastly, there's a need for partnerships, cross-collaboration, multilateral engagements between institutions, but also within think tanks. They have the knowledge, they have the skills, we do the policy. We need to see where we bridge the gap between science and policy as well. Thank you.
Just final one on that, just for you. You know, with these coastal communities, like how can their concerns be raised at the global level? You talked about panels and, you know, partnerships, and do you have any?
Okay, so a very practical example would be there's a small community in Tanzania, a community called Zanzibar. They have the seaweed production, which is basically for women. And at the African Union, we've seen this initiative, we've supported it, and we are planning to replicate it across the region. It's a very, what they do, they produce seaweeds. They use the production of seaweeds to generate pharmaceutical, cosmetics, soaps, and it's very useful. It promotes, like I said, indigenous, but also it's creating employment to women who are the indigenous people or who are the vulnerable group. That's one example. In Ghana, for example, also, we have local fishermen that have, because most of the fishermen in Africa, mostly, not always, but they are not well educated on how to use GPS and all of that. So what do they do in Ghana? What they do, they have a local device. Through the mobile, they just text you when is the right time to fish, when is the right time not to go into fishing, through the University of Ghana. So initiatives like these indigenously could be built upon. A practical example, like I said, is that of Zanzibar. It's one I like to use because from far and wide, people come into Zanzibar to learn how they transfer the seaweeds to pharmaceutical medicines and beauty products as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So at our final question, so have new leaders and inspiring stories emerged in these past years? What have you seen in your different areas? Who should I go for? Marty.
I was hoping you'd pick on me for this one. I love this question. So, women in Seychelles don't have it easy. Teenage pregnancies in the Seychelles is high, and it continues to climb every year. And teenage pregnancies in Seychelles are 3 times the global average, which is high. And we've got lots of single moms in the Seychelles. We've got a lot of challenges that women are facing. But that does not mean that they are not resilient. And I say this because women are leading the charge when it comes to conservation and even science within the blue economy model. And I'll give you two examples. So women were the leading voices when it came to this successful youth-led movement to actually ban plastics in the Seychelles, and successfully they managed to do that. In 2018, I believe Seychelles completely banned plastic imports into the country, certain plastic bags, straws, stuff like that. So transformative leadership is being shown by women in the Seychelles. But what I'm really proud about is that women scientists predominantly form part of a group of, it was a multi-nation group that actually mapped the seagrass meadows around the Seychelles Islands for the first time. It was a carbon assessment, and it was a study done in alignment with Seychelles NDC, where the country promised to protect 100% of its seagrass meadows and mangroves by 2030. And the Seychelles is now in the process of developing a blue carbon policy. So we are seeing, I don't want to say the rise of women, because women have always been rising, but in Seychelles, predominantly, very, very proud to say that women and youth have really embraced the blue economy model. It was quite top-down when it was first introduced, but now communities are starting to define it and embrace it and utilize it in a way that works for it. And so far, yeah, very happy to see that we're seeing a very good participation from women and youth in this space. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Simone?
Yeah, I'm smiling.
Yeah.
There's a lady in front of me who's very tired. Where it comes to my country, I come from an area where we are blessed with abalone. Blessed, truly blessed. But name me one incident where I have entered a home where I was offered a plate of abalone as dinner. It doesn't happen because it gets exported out of my country. And that is the problem. Seafood products have become unaffordable for Africans. And that is where we need industrial intervention mechanisms to work from a food security perspective, where grassroots-led leadership, transformative leadership, needs to play a role in linking food security with making seafood a part of the protein group on local menus. But it's hard to bridge when you have the concept sea blindness operating under our people. And when you analyze the root cause of sea blindness, the strategic intent around it was exactly that. It was exactly to deploy the very same model that is deployed on all Africa's minerals. We farm it, we mine it, we export it raw, and we don't see a dime of it. And in this case, it is so far that it's impacting on what is on our plates of food in front of us. I love seafood, but it is not in the old days where I used to have it every day anymore. It doesn't work like that anymore. Because you have these commercial fishing companies who has these quotas that they export predominantly to the developed world at a very high carbon footprint. Thousands of kilometers of carbon footprint. Whereas that could have been sold to the local communities to not just one, work against hunger and provide food security, also to lessen the carbon footprint, and three, most importantly, to bring in the element of job creation. Because fish is not just there to consume. Have you ever seen a fish with a scar? Please don't think about Nemo and that guy in the tank, okay? You won't see a wildly caught fish with a scar because there's a specific sea plant in the ocean that they rub themselves against when they get hurt. The implications of that for marine biotechnology in the area of cosmetology is immense. In my continent, we suffer from high blood pressure and diabetes. Have you ever seen a fish having high blood pressure? Diabetes? Interesting research direction, don't you think? So when you try to implement then the kinds of leadership that the industry need to make this happen, it does not it can't just be grassroots led. It can't just be transformative. It has to be futuristic. It has to be in line with the needs of the community on a basic level. And that does mean going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs and looking at those 5 needs and being fully aware that Wi-Fi connectivity will be our next basic need. And that is not being addressed here. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really good point. What about Senthil? Have you seen new leaders and inspiring stories emerging?
I will give you a few examples. Actually, it's one of that in India there is a state called Kerala. There is a one time is about 2017 is a huge flood. So at that time, government don't have that enough boats to rescue the people. So we are providing about that various ocean state forecast, PFZ on a regular basis to the fishermen. And also that we announced that this is that lacuna, is it possible how you can help? All the fishermen, they brought the boat and involved with the government to rescue that operations for the people. That's the one. Second one is about that even the religious leaders, social network, you know about that Sunday they have a search in that prayers. Before that they are also providing some of that conservation things, and also they document about that all the fishermen and etc. One time is about that Hudud cyclone, the fishermen is drafted from India to Lakshadweep, so that the panchayat leaders and that religious network people, they provided all the details, who are the people are there, and also with the help of Coast Guard we search and etc. And also that local panchayats also effectively disseminating this kind of early warning through the public address system, which they have that their own different purposes. And also it's about in India there is a women self-help groups are there. This is about that small 15-22 women in the village, they have formed a group, and also it's about they are exchanging the thrift societies, about that exchange the money to start the various micro enterprises. During this kind of disasters is about that these women also is about by walk is going to the different interior parts and telling that people kindly evacuate, this is that cyclone will come, go to the cyclone shelter, this kind of things. So this the thing is about even youth also is about that the local schools, they are involving about that this kind of evacuation, as well as about providing that hygienic, and also is about that water to the people to organize during the temporary shelter. The thing is about that, one is about the capacity building, and another one is about continuous engagement with that other people and other local kind of thing. Because even now that Coast Guard and other people, they are also believing only these people is about, because each state we have a color coding of the boat. So sometimes about that some terrorist other boats are coming. So these people only providing the information to the Coast Guard is about that what are the, so this kind of security things also local communities involving. So the thing is about in a correct way, if you provide about that all the information, why they want the conservation, that many players are involving already. It's not like I'm not mentioning the name, but that many people are involving, both women and youth, as well as about that grassroots networks involving this kind of resilient operations.
Right, thank you. And Linda, from again broader AU, what stories have you been observing? And
So I just have one story, and this would be on the context of innovative technologies, right? The AU has the Africa Multihazard Early Warning and Action Situation Room, and it's a very beautiful room in Addis Ababa, but it's also, why I like to draw to it is because it has dealt over the past 2 years since its establishment on issues related to coastal erosion, cyclone in Mozambique, and all of that. There are a lot to mention. So what the room does, it's simple. It's a situation room. It analyzes the data, and we have people there working 24 hours. And it informs member states when there's going to be a potential risks or potential disaster. There's going to be a sea level rise. This is very interesting model that could be adopted or replicated across each regional communities or across other continents to follow as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And lucky last, Weliswa, what stories and new leaders have you seen emerging? This is the last question. I know you're dying to have a sleep.
Okay, I have just two stories that have emerged over the past years. The first one is on the EPWP. It's a public works that focuses on conservation. So it's actually targeting the youth that actually do these small jobs so that they can serve the environment, also create the employment. Another one, we have a beach cop whereby we've got these, not necessarily youth, but middle age. They actually guard the beach, more especially in terms of littering and also damaging the environment and also cleaning around the environment. Those ones, they've worked well. Thank you.
Thank you. So that concludes the 4 key questions, and so now it's over to you guys. Right? Fabulous. You were first. Yeah.
I just wanted to introduce an elephant in the room in regard to the engagement of the coastal communities. My name is Deepak Shetty. I was former career civil servant. I served as Secretary in the Government of India. I was also Director General of Shipping, closely associated with this. When I look at it from a maritime security dimension, and this is very proximate, I mean, he just sort of preempted my question, but I'll amplify that. If you don't address the coastal communities, I'll just give you wanted a story. All of us are aware of the horrors that emanated from out of Somalia. What really happened? IUU, illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, all that happened, straddling from the period from 2008 until about 2014, and the mayhem that it unleashed across the maritime sector space, millions and millions of dollars paid out as ransom. Why? Only because the local fishers didn't have employment, and then you had all of this getting plundered, the fish stock, by other poachers who came in from other countries. Likewise, dumping of toxic waste in the waters of Somalia. That added fuel to the fire. So you have that other dimension where if you're not cognizant and mindful of what it can mean to involve them very meaningfully, this is what you will probably end up having.
So what's your question?
The question is that you need to have this engagement, but also please bear in mind that it's not just a very proximate implication or a ramification. It is a larger dimension which you would have to factor into decision making. The other point that my colleague from India made was that, we had this terrorist attack in Mumbai in 26/11/2008, and what it really emerged is that you had these guys coming in from a proximate state, and I don't want to name lest it sound derogatory. They came in and they walked through the fishing community. Blissfully, no one noticed. But if they were actually sort of sensitized and made aware that they could well serve as eyes and ears of the local cops, then I think there's a great deal of service which they can offer in terms of preparedness and escalating it to the local police.
I think they did.
No, they didn't. It was belatedly. It was belatedly after these people came in. They literally no.
Fishermen did warn the moment.
We should have invited you to be on the panel.
I'm afraid.
Are there
Sorry.
any response to?
Okay.
Yeah, great.
The topic of coastguarding services on my continent is an extremely sensitive one because it is paramilitary in nature. And on my continent, we don't have that capability. It doesn't suit the West for us to have it. What we do have is the deployment of our navies who are there to protect national strategic interests. But they are being deployed to chase after criminals on a catch and release principle. Now, when you have those kinds of systemically inbred misactions, you find that you're disabling a whole ecosystem by just that. Because with illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing, we found with a satellite that the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research in South Africa developed, it's called OSIMS, and it's a satellite system that monitors the traffic on our 200 nautical mile zone, because that's where it happens. People hoover on that line and then help themselves to it, of course, in conjunction with the correct catching weather and circumstances. But coast guarding and fishermen's access and ownership to fishing boats plays a role in your maritime administration. That is what you have to call up on in a case of terrorism or war or any of those relations. But what do we have? We have 40-year-old wooden buckets that's deployed on our oceans with no HCAP regulation. What does that do? What is the impact of that? The impact of that is we cannot have shipbuilding. Because if you had an age gap, you could pull in those vessels and build new ones and take the old ones and put them in the coastal areas and ask the children, take it apart, put it back together, go out to sea and see what you can do with it. Whilst the guys who is catching the fish, who's making the money, they are actually having access to the new assets. Those are critical steps that are missing in our blue economy because we tend to work with things all in one go. We don't compartmentalize. We don't develop strategies that are aimed specifically at root causes, implement them, stand back, and measure the success of them. I do hope that one of the outcomes in the near 5 years would be that we would exactly have cultivated that kind of capabilities.
Good response. Great. So we've got a little bit more time, do we? I know we've got 15. So what's your name?
Hi, everyone. My name is Shashwat Koirala. I'm an economist at the OECD, and I lead our work on the sustainable ocean economy in developing and emerging countries. I wanted to ask about the role of development assistance, which you have touched on a little bit, and where we often hear the words that we want to build resilient communities. And my question is simply, when and in what ways does development work effectively from your experiences? And maybe if I could ask Malshini as well, because you mentioned the blue bonds and the debt for nature swaps, and we hear a lot of interest in this at the OECD as well. What made the Seychelles experience successful, and what could have gone better? If you have any information on that, that would be great. Thank you.
Well, Marshi, I thought that was a good one for you. Yeah.
So what made the Seychelles experience successful? We are small, but we are very mighty in our ability to leverage bigger partnerships. We deploy what's known as sunny diplomacy, or Seychelles, we're fun, we're hospitable, we're warm people, and we deploy that in our international relations as well. We have this saying, friend to all, enemy to none. And that was one very good reason, I think, the foundation for how we were able to come across this blue economy model that worked on so many levels for us, is because we had so many partners helping us. So Seychelles did not go alone on this endeavor. We had the World Bank assisting us. We had the Commonwealth assisting us. We had the Leonardo DiCaprio Fund assisting us. So we had public-private partnerships that came in. We had a lot of stakeholder engagement. And that really worked for us on a number of levels. So it also worked because we were the first, and we were trying something really new and innovative. And a lot of people really liked that. I hope that helps to answer your question.
I'll do the other side.
Okay. Hi, I'm Rahul. I lead a think tank in Delhi, Western House. And a lot of my work explores the maritime security architecture and impacted by climate change. Julie, if I may indulge with you, I want to know about the experiences in the Western Pacific.
Yeah.
And definitely, New Zealand is the only Western Pacific nation I have over here.
Yeah.
What has been your experience with community resilience in New Zealand, in the Western Pacific nations? And are these experiences different from that in Africa?
You know what? I was listening to a lot of the stories and anecdotes from tonight, and I know there were references to developing countries, and I'm sitting here going, there were so many similarities, especially, in New Zealand, we have, you probably know about the Indigenous people of New Zealand and the guardian, the custodianship, yeah. And so, you know, I'm hearing massive similarities, but I think, I don't know, you know, through the treaty and you know, with a lot of work has been done, and you know, my business, we work with commercial fisheries that are owned by all iwi, all the tribes of New Zealand, Aotearoa, New Zealand. So I'm probably not quite answering that, but you know, there are massive similarities, and I can speak for New Zealand specifically. So yeah, it's just, I just don't think it's a develop versus developing, or from a country's perspective. Yeah. Yep. You look very eager. Yeah, can we get you a?
I'm KK Roy Chaudhary. My question to our friends from the Africa, we know that the major part of Africa is yet to be lighted properly. So how proactive you are in embracing renewable energy to facilitate all your community activities now that International Solar Agency is also supporting?
Do you want to paraphrase that? I just don't think we're 100% clear on exactly.
The role of renewable.
Yeah, he basically wants to know about the energy transition process.
Yeah, okay, energy transition.
Sorry, can
No, not for us. Yeah.
I'm from South Africa.
Yeah, great.
I had the opportunity of actually working with solar plants, and a lot of plants that is built in Africa, the gas power plant. And what I've seen is the European countries would actually come into Africa and do the project, and those of us that have all the skills to do the plants and the projects, right, get fit in as employees, right, and they don't really say, okay, South Africans, you've got skills, the government of the day wants to build a solar plant, can you guys go ahead and build some solar plant? So they consult with people in Europe and give them the job. I just come up from a project that was in Mozambique. I'm a South African, right? I am a South African. But here a Spanish company calls me up, headhunts me, please can you come and assist us to build a gas power station? But yet the communities or the people from South Africa are being marginalized in actually all the industries because they get used as employees. Why can't we build the projects? And unfortunately, I blame it on our governments because they're not looking at us as the infrastructure to say,
So I'm getting a little bit, we're a little bit over time. I've not been watching that, so we'll wrap up here. But if you want to connect with any of the panelists after, you can. Yeah, great, thank you.
I would like to respond to this question on renewable energy.
Do you want to?
Yeah.
Why don't you? I think that we've got to wrap it up. So why don't you guys connect, human to human?
Human to human.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much to our panelists as well as our guests for joining us for this technical session. If I could just present a token of our appreciation to our panels. guests, dinner served outside.